The alarm bells were ringing across the naval base when Captain Rodriguez received the most unusual orders of her 20-year career. She stood in the communications room, reading the classified message for the third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They didn't. Her ship, the USS Thunder, was being asked to do something that sounded completely crazy. Intelligence had spotted a massive enemy fleet moving toward international shipping lanes. 37 ships strong, this armada could shut down trade routes that millions of people depended on. The problem was simple but terrifying, Rodriguez. And her crew were the only ones close enough to stop them, walking to the bridge. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The Thunder was special, sure, but it was still just one ship. The enemy had cruisers, destroyers, and enough firepower to level a small city. How was one vessel supposed to stand against all that? The Thunder wasn't your typical warship, though. The Navy had packed it with experimental technology that most sailors had only heard rumors about. There was the quantum radar system that could see through fog, rain, and even some types of camouflage. The AI-assisted targeting computers could track dozens of threats at once and calculate firing solutions faster than any human crew. Most impressive of all was the advanced stealth coding. That made the ship nearly invisible to enemy sensors when activated. Rodriguez had handpicked her crew of 180 sailors, and each one was among the best in their field. Chief Petty Officer Williams ran the weapon systems like a master pianist playing a concert. Lieutenant Commander Park could make the engines sing, coaxing every ounce of speed from the massive turbines. Sonar technician Jackson had ears so sharp he could identify individual ships just by listening to their engine signatures, but even with all this talent and technology, the math was brutal. 37 enemy ships versus one American destroyer? The odds were so bad they weren't even worth calculating. As Rodriguez gathered her senior officers in the briefing room, she could see the worry in their eyes. These were brave men and women who had signed up to defend their country, but this felt different. This felt like being asked to stop a freight train with a bicycle. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The enemy fleet had been spotted 3 days ago, moving in perfect formation across the Pacific. Satellite images showed massive battleships surrounded by smaller escort vessels, all bristling with weapons. Their destination was clear, the narrow shipping channel that connected Asian markets with American ports. If they managed to blockade those waters, the economic damage would be catastrophic. Rodriguez spread the photos across the table and watched her officers study them. The silence stretched on for several minutes before Lieutenant Commander Park finally spoke up. "Captain, with respect, how are we supposed to take on all of this?" Park's voice carried the question everyone was thinking. Rodriguez had been asking herself the same thing. Traditional naval tactics were useless here. They couldn't simply sail up and start shooting, they'd be overwhelmed in minutes. But as she stared at the satellite images, an idea began forming in her mind. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it might be their only chance. The key wasn't to fight the enemy fleet directly. That would be suicide. Instead, they needed to make the enemy think they were facing something much bigger and more dangerous than a single destroyer. They needed to plant seeds of doubt and confusion in the minds of the enemy commanders. Rodriguez began outlining her plan to the stunned officers. They would use the Thunder's advanced systems not just as weapons, but as tools of deception. The quantum radar could do more than just see the enemy. It could also create false signals that would confuse enemy sensors. The AI systems could mimic the electronic signatures of different types of ships, making it seem like a whole fleet was approaching. The stealth coding would be crucial too. By appearing and disappearing from enemy radar, they could create the illusion of multiple ships moving in coordination. It would be like a magic trick on a massive scale. With the entire enemy fleet as the audience, Chief Williams leaned forward, studying the technical specifications of their electronic warfare systems. "Captain, this could actually work. If we can make them think they're surrounded, they might break formation, and once they're scattered and confused, we pick them off one by one," Rodriguez finished. "Or better yet, we make them so paranoid they retreat without us having to fire." A shot. The plan was taking shape, but Rodriguez knew it would require perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake, one moment where the illusion broke down, and the Thunder would find itself facing the full fury of 37 enemy ships. As the briefing continued, Rodriguez watched her officers transform from worried sailors into determined warriors. They began discussing technical details, working out how to coordinate the different systems, and planning contingencies for when things went wrong. Because things always went wrong in combat. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. The crew ran through simulation after simulation, practicing the complex dance of electronic warfare they would need to perform. The weapons teams rehearsed their targeting procedures. The engine room prepared for the high-speed maneuvers that might mean the difference between life and death. Night fell. Rodriguez stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the dark ocean. Somewhere out there, 37 enemy ships were heading toward them. In less than 18 hours, they would meet. The fate of international shipping lanes, and possibly much more, would be decided by what happened in that encounter. Rodriguez thought about her crew, sleeping fitfully in their bunks below. Most of them were young, with families back home who had no idea their loved ones were about to attempt something this dangerous. She thought about the enemy sailors too, probably feeling confident in their numbers and firepower, not knowing they were about to face something completely unexpected. The Thunder cut through the waves at maximum speed, racing toward what would either be their greatest triumph or their final battle. Rodriguez had given her crew the best plan she could devise, but she knew that in the chaos of combat, even the best plans often fell apart. Still, as she felt the steady vibration of the engines beneath her feet and heard the quiet efficiency of the night watch going about their duties, Rodriguez felt a spark of hope. The Thunder might be just one ship, but it was crewed by exceptional people and equipped with extraordinary technology. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to turn the impossible into the inevitable. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when sonar technician Jackson's voice cut through the bridge like a knife. "Captain, I've got contacts. Multiple contacts bearing 090. "This is it, ma'am. They're here." Rodriguez felt her heart skip a beat, but her voice remained steady. "How many, Jackson?" 37 confirmed contacts, Captain. Just like intelligence said. They're spread out across 15 miles of ocean, moving in perfect formation. Rodriguez walked to the bridge windows and raised her binoculars. At first, she saw nothing but empty ocean. Then, like ghosts materializing from the morning mist, the enemy fleet began to appear. One ship, then another, then dozens more until the entire horizon seemed filled with gray steel and bristling weapons. The sight was absolutely terrifying. Lieutenant Commander Park stood beside her, also staring at the approaching armada. "Sweet mother of pearl," he whispered. "Look at the size of those battleships." Rodriguez had seen satellite photos, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. The enemy flagship was a massive beast, easily 3 times the size of the Thunder. Its main guns looked like they could punch holes through mountains. Surrounding it were cruisers and destroyers, each one bristling with missile launchers and defensive systems. "All stop," Rodriguez ordered. "Bring us to a complete halt." The helmsman looked confused. "Ma'am, shouldn't we be taking evasive action? Negative? We're going to sit right here and wait for them to come to us." Chief Williams spoke up from the weapons station. "Captain, they'll be in firing range in 20 minutes. "Are we really going to just sit here?" Rodriguez understood their concern. Every instinct screamed at them to run, to put distance between the Thunder and the approaching enemy. But running would accomplish nothing except delaying the inevitable. Their only chance was to make the enemy commanders think twice about what they were facing. "Open a channel on all frequencies," Rodriguez ordered. "Let's say hello to our visitors." The communications officer nodded and activated the radio. Rodriguez picked up the microphone, knowing that every word she spoke would be heard not just by the enemy fleet, but by naval intelligence agencies around the world. "Attention enemy vessels. This is Captain Rodriguez of the United States Navy. You are approaching international waters under armed escort. Turn back immediately or face the consequences. The response came almost instantly, spoken in accented, but clear English. "American ship, this is Admiral Kozlov. You are severely outnumbered. Withdraw immediately and you will not be harmed." Rodriguez smiled grimly. Admiral Kozlov was exactly what she had expected, confident, professional, and completely convinced that his overwhelming numerical advantage guaranteed victory. Time to plant the first seeds of doubt. "Admiral Kozlov, I'm afraid withdrawal is not an option. These shipping lanes remain under international protection." There was a long pause before Kozlov responded. "Captain, I count one American destroyer against my entire fleet. Surely you cannot be serious about challenging us. Admiral, you might want to take another look at your sensors." This was the moment Rodriguez had been waiting for. She nodded to Chief Williams, who began activating the Thunder's electronic warfare systems. The quantum radar array hummed to life, sending out carefully crafted signals that would confuse and mislead enemy sensors on the enemy ships. Radar operators suddenly found their screens lighting up with new contacts. Ghost signals appeared and disappeared, suggesting the presence of additional vessels moving in the area. The Thunder's AI systems began broadcasting false radio chatter. Mimicking the communication patterns of different ship classes, Rodriguez watched through her binoculars as the enemy formation began to show signs of confusion. Ships that had been moving in perfect order started making small course corrections. Signal lights flickered between vessels as commanders tried to figure out what their sensors were telling them. "Captain," Jackson reported from his sonar station. "They're going active with their sonar. Sounds like they're trying to get a better picture of what's out here." "Let them look," Rodriguez replied. "The more they search, the more confused they'll get." The Thunder stealth systems were working perfectly. To enemy sensors, the ship appeared as little more than a faint blip that kept fading in and out of detection. Combined with the false signals being generated by their electronic warfare suite, it created a confusing picture that suggested multiple vessels operating in the area. Admiral Kozlov's voice crackled over the radio again, and this time Rodriguez could hear a note of uncertainty. "Captain Rodriguez, exactly how many ships are you commanding?" Rodriguez chose her words carefully. "Admiral, I have sufficient forces to protect these waters." It wasn't technically a lie, but it certainly wasn't the whole truth either. The beauty of the statement was that it could mean anything. Kozlov would have to decide for himself what sufficient forces meant. Through her binoculars, Rodriguez could see increased activity on the enemy ships. Signal lights were flashing constantly now, and several vessels had altered course slightly. The perfect formation was beginning to show cracks. Lieutenant Commander Park was monitoring the enemy fleet's communications, and what he was hearing made him grin. "Captain, they're arguing among themselves." "Some of their ship commanders are?" "Reporting contacts that others can't see." "They're starting to question their own sensors." This was exactly what Rodriguez had hoped for. The enemy fleet's greatest strength was its coordination and overwhelming numbers. But if she could make them doubt what they were seeing, that strength could quickly become a weakness. "Ma'am," Chief Williams called out, "enemy flagship is changing course. They're angling toward us, but maintaining distance." Rodriguez nodded. Kozlov was being cautious, probably trying to get a better look at the Thunder while staying out of what he thought might be a trap. Good. Caution was the enemy of decisive action, and indecision was exactly what she needed right now. The Thunder sat motionless in the water, a single small ship facing down an entire armada. To any outside observer, it would have looked like the most lopsided confrontation in naval history. But Rodriguez knew that in warfare, appearances could be deceiving. Sometimes the side that looked weakest was actually holding all the cards. "Jackson, what's their formation looking like now?" "Still holding together, Captain, but it's getting sloppy. I'm seeing gaps opening up between some of the escort vessels. A couple of the destroyers have fallen back from their assigned positions." "Perfect." The enemy commanders were starting to second-guess themselves, making small adjustments based on sensor readings they couldn't quite trust. Each tiny course change created ripple effects throughout the formation. Like pulling loose threads from a carefully woven tapestry, Rodriguez keyed the radio again. Admiral Kozlov, you have 10 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that, I cannot guarantee the safety of your fleet. The silence that followed stretched on for nearly a full minute. Rodriguez could almost hear the wheels turning in Kozlov's head. He was probably studying his radar screens, trying to make sense of the contradictory information his sensors were providing. Part of him undoubtedly wanted to simply overwhelm the lone American ship with sheer firepower, but another part was warning him that this situation wasn't what it appeared to be. When Kozlov finally responded, his voice carried a harder edge. Captain Rodriguez, I do not respond well to threats from inferior forces. Rodriguez smiled. The fact that he felt the need to emphasize his superiority suggested he wasn't as confident as he wanted to sound. Admiral, in naval warfare, superior and inferior are often matters of perspective. I suggest you take a very careful look at your tactical situation. The game was just beginning, and Rodriguez was starting to think they might actually have a chance. Rodriguez could feel the tension building on the bridge as the 10-minute deadline she had given Admiral Kozlov ticked away. Her crew was watching her every move, waiting for orders that could either save their lives or end them. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Chief Williams, initiate Operation Phantom Fleet. Williams nodded and began typing commands into his console. Aye, Captain, activating full electronic warfare suite. This is going to get interesting. What happened next was like watching a master magician perform their greatest trick. The thunders. Advanced computer systems came alive, sending out dozens of fake radar signals that painted false pictures across enemy screens. To Admiral Kozlov's fleet, it suddenly looked like American ships were appearing out of nowhere. Jackson, what are you hearing from their communications? Rodriguez asked. Jackson pressed his headphones tighter against his ears, concentrating on the enemy radio chatter. Captain, they're going crazy over there. Ship commanders are reporting contacts popping up all around them. Some are saying they've got destroyers to the north, others are claiming there's a cruiser closing from the west. Rodriguez felt a surge of satisfaction. The confusion was spreading through the enemy fleet exactly as she had hoped. But this was just the beginning. She needed to escalate the deception before Kozlov figured out what was really happening. Lieutenant Peterson, I need you to start broadcasting false fleet communications. Make it sound like we're coordinating with other ships. Peterson, their youngest communications officer, looked nervous but determined. What should I say, Captain? Use the AI assistance program. Let the computer generate realistic fleet chatter. Different voices, different call signs, the works. Make them think they're listening to a whole battle group coordinating an attack. As Peterson began his electronic theater performance, the bridge filled with the sound of fake radio communications. The AI system was incredibly sophisticated, creating distinct voice patterns for imaginary ship commanders. To anyone listening, it sounded like a coordinated fleet was moving into position. Blue leader to all ships, maintain formation and prepare. F4 engagement. Roger, blue leader. Red squadron reports contacts bearing 270. Confirmed, red squadron. White group moved to intercept positions. The fake conversations continued, each one designed to paint a picture of overwhelming American naval power converging on the area. Rodriguez watched through her binoculars as the enemy fleet's behavior began to change dramatically. Chief Williams, I want you to activate the stealth coding on my mark. We're going to disappear for exactly 30 seconds, then reappear in a different position. Williams understood immediately. Captain, that's brilliant. When we vanish and reappear somewhere else, they'll think there were two different ships. Exactly. And if we do it right, we can make them think there are Thunder-class destroyers all around them. Rodriguez waited for the perfect moment, watching as several enemy ships moved closer to investigate the confusing sensor readings. Mark, activate stealth systems and change course to heading 045. The Thunder seemed to fade away like a ghost ship. On enemy radar screens, the lone American destroyer simply vanished. But 30 seconds later, when the stealth systems deactivated, the Thunder appeared to be in a completely different location. Several miles from where it had disappeared, the effect on the enemy fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ship commanders who had been trying to track one American vessel suddenly thought they were dealing with multiple threats that could appear and disappear at will. Jackson was practically bouncing in his chair as he monitored enemy communications. "Captain, you've got to hear this. Their destroyer captains are reporting ghost ships. One guy is swearing he had a positive lock on us and then we just vanished. Another one is claiming we appeared right behind his formation." But Rodriguez wasn't finished yet. She had one more card to play, and it would either convince the enemy they were facing an overwhelming force or expose her deception completely. "Chief Williams, I want you to paint every single ship in that fleet with our targeting systems all at once. Let them see that we can lock onto every one of them simultaneously." Williams' fingers flew across his controls, and suddenly every enemy vessel found itself being tracked by American targeting radars. Warning alarms began sounding throughout Kozlov's fleet as defensive systems detected multiple targeting locks. The psychological impact was devastating. From the enemy's perspective, it looked like dozens of American ships had achieved firing solutions on their entire fleet simultaneously. No single vessel could target that many ships at once, which meant they had to be facing a massive coordinated attack. Through her binoculars, Rodriguez could see the enemy formation beginning to break apart. Ships that had maintained perfect spacing were now spreading out, trying to make themselves harder targets. Some vessels were changing course completely, moving away from what they perceived as targeting threats. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander," Park called out from his station. "Enemy destroyer Group Charlie is breaking formation. They're turning south and increasing speed?" "Visual confirmation," called out the lookout. "3 enemy ships are definitely moving away from the main formation." Rodriguez felt her heart racing. The plan was actually working. She was watching a carefully coordinated enemy fleet fall apart due to confusion and fear of threats that didn't even exist, but Admiral Kozlov wasn't giving up yet. His voice crackled over the radio, and this time he sounded angry rather than confused. "Captain Rodriguez, enough games. I know you're using electronic warfare to confuse my sensors. Whatever tricks you're playing, they won't work much longer." Rodriguez keyed her microphone, keeping her voice calm and confident. "Admiral, I'm not sure what you mean. My fleet is simply taking defensive positions to protect these shipping lanes." "Your fleet?" Kozlov's voice rose slightly. "My sensors show one ship, Captain, one ship playing electronic games." "Admiral, perhaps your sensors need recalibration. I count multiple American vessels in this area, all prepared to defend international waters." It was a dangerous gamble. If Kozlov decided to call her bluff and attack directly, the Thunder would be in serious trouble. But Rodriguez was betting that the confusion and fear she had created would make him hesitate. The radio fell silent for several long minutes. Rodriguez could imagine Kozlov on his bridge, studying his radar screens and trying to separate reality from deception. His ship commanders were probably bombarding him with contradictory reports, each one adding to the confusion. When Kozlov spoke again, his voice carried a note of frustration. "Captain, my destroyers are reporting multiple contacts, but my flagship sensors show something different." "Explain this discrepancy," Rodriguez smiled. The confusion was working exactly as planned. "Admiral, modern naval warfare involves many variables. Perhaps you should consider the possibility that you're not seeing the complete tactical picture." What she didn't tell him was that his flagship's more advanced sensors were probably giving him more accurate readings than his smaller ships. But by questioning his own equipment and trusting the reports from his scattered destroyers, Kozlov was actually helping her deception succeed. "Jackson, what's the formation looking like now?" "Captain, it's falling apart. About half the enemy ships have moved out of their original positions. Some are clustered together for mutual protection. Others are spread out trying to avoid what they think are targeting locks. They don't look like a coordinated fleet anymore." Rodriguez nodded with satisfaction. A scattered, confused enemy was exactly what she needed. The longer this went on, the more the enemy commanders would doubt their own judgment and equipment. The Thunder continued its deadly game of electronic hide-and-seek. appearing and disappearing from enemy sensors while broadcasting false signals. That suggested a massive American fleet was closing in from multiple directions. With each passing minute, Admiral Kozlov's seemingly unstoppable armada looked less like a unified fighting force and more like a collection of isolated, frightened ships. Rodriguez watched through her binoculars as the enemy fleet continued to spread out in confusion. The formation that had looked so threatening just an hour ago was now scattered across 20 miles of ocean. But she knew the electronic warfare. Tricks alone wouldn't be enough. It was time to take things to the next level. Chief Williams, I want you to prepare for precision strikes. We're going to start taking out their ability to communicate and coordinate. Williams looked up from his weapons console with concern. Captain, if we start shooting, they'll know exactly where we are. The stealth coding won't help us once we open fire. That's why we're going to make every shot count, then disappear before they can respond? Think of it as surgical strikes, not a firefight. Rodriguez had studied the enemy fleet's formation carefully. Even scattered as they were now, she could identify the key ships that were trying to hold the formation together. Take out their communication abilities and the confusion would turn into complete chaos. Target the communication arrays on that. Cruiser at bearing 280. I want a clean hit that disables their radio equipment without causing casualties. The Thunder's advanced targeting system locked onto the enemy cruiser's main communication tower. The precision was incredible. The computer could calculate the exact angle and velocity needed to destroy the antenna array while leaving the rest of the ship undamaged. Firing solution locked, Captain, Williams reported. Ready to engage. Fire. The missile streaked across the water, leaving a thin white trail in its wake. Rodriguez watched through her binoculars as it struck the enemy cruiser's communication mast with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion was small but effective. The tower collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Target hit, called out the lookout. Clean strike on their communications array. Immediately, Rodriguez ordered the Thunder to activate its stealth systems and change course. Within seconds, the ship had vanished from enemy sensors and was moving to a new position 3 miles away. The effect on the enemy fleet was immediate. The cruiser that had been trying to coordinate the scattered destroyers was now cut off from radio contact. Ship commanders who had been looking for guidance suddenly found themselves operating alone. Jackson, what are you hearing? Captain, they're going crazy trying to figure out where that missile came from. The cruiser is trying to signal with flags, but half their ships are too far away to see them clearly. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Let's give them something else to worry about. Williams, I want you to target the radar array on that destroyer at bearing 150. The process repeated itself. The Thunder appeared just long enough to fire a single, precise missile, then vanished again before the enemy could respond. The destroyer's main radar dish crumpled under the impact, leaving the ship blind to air and surface threats. 2 targets down, Captain, Williams reported with satisfaction. Both ships are still afloat and their crews are safe, but they're effectively out of the fight. What Rodriguez was doing was psychological warfare at its finest. She wasn't trying to sink enemy ships or kill sailors that would only make them fight harder. Instead, she was systematically destroying their ability to function as a coordinated force. Lieutenant Commander Park was monitoring the enemy fleet's movements, and what he saw made him whistle in amazement. Captain, you've got to see this. 3 of their destroyers just collided while trying to avoid what they thought was an incoming torpedo. Rodriguez grabbed her binoculars and focused on the area Park was indicating. Sure enough, 3 enemy ships had gotten tangled up with each other while making evasive maneuvers. None of them appeared seriously damaged, but they were stuck together like pieces of a puzzle, unable to move effectively. How did that happen? She asked. Near as I can tell, Park explained. One of their sonar operators picked up the sound of our missile launch and thought it was a torpedo. He called out a warning and all 3 ships started turning to avoid it. Problem was, they turned into each other. The irony wasn't lost on Rodriguez. The enemy fleet's own defensive instincts were working against them. The more scared and confused they became, the more likely they were to make mistakes, but Admiral Kozlov wasn't giving up. His flagship was still trying to maintain some kind of order, using signal lights to communicate with ships that had lost. Radio contact? Rodriguez could see the pattern he was trying to establish, gathering his scattered vessels into smaller, more manageable groups. "We can't let him reorganize," Rodriguez muttered. "Williams, see that destroyer that's trying to join up with Kozlov's group? Take out its engines." This shot was trickier. The Thunder had to get closer to ensure accuracy, which meant more exposure to enemy fire. But Rodriguez knew that stopping the regrouping process was crucial to maintaining the chaos they had created. The missile struck the destroyer's engine compartment with surgical precision. There was a small explosion, followed by a cloud of black smoke as the ship's propulsion system shut down. The destroyer began drifting helplessly, unable to rejoin Kozlov's formation. "Direct hit on target's propulsion system," Williams reported. "She's dead in the water but still intact." As the Thunder disappeared once again, Rodriguez watched the psychological impact ripple through the enemy fleet. Ship commanders who had been trying to follow Kozlov's orders now hesitated, afraid that moving would make them the next target. Jackson was practically vibrating with excitement as he listened to enemy communications. "Captain, their radio chatter is unbelievable. They're reporting phantom torpedo attacks, invisible destroyers, and coordinated strikes from multiple directions. Some of them think they're under attack by submarines." The confusion was becoming self-reinforcing. Each unexplained event added to the fear and uncertainty. Enemy sailors were seeing threats everywhere, even where none existed. "Ma'am," the lookout called out, "I'm seeing signal lights flashing between enemy ships. Looks like they're trying to coordinate some kind of response." Rodriguez studied the pattern of lights through her binoculars. Kozlov was attempting to use old-fashioned visual signals to bypass his communication problems. But coordinating 37 ships with signal lights was like trying to conduct an orchestra with hand gestures from a mile away. "Williams, do you see that communications ship at the edge of their formation, the one with all the antenna arrays?" Williams checked his targeting scope. "I see her, Captain. That's their electronic warfare vessel. She's probably trying to analyze our jamming signals. Not anymore. Take out every antenna on that ship." The barrage of precision strikes that followed was like watching a master surgeon at work. Missile after missile struck the communication ship's various antenna systems, each one destroying a specific capability without harming the crew. Within minutes, the vessel looked like a porcupine that had lost all its quills. The psychological effect was devastating. The enemy fleet's most sophisticated electronic warfare ship had been systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't even see consistently. If their best equipment couldn't protect them, what chance did the rest of the fleet have? Rodriguez was starting to see panic set in among some of the enemy ships. 2 destroyers had broken away from the main group entirely and were heading back toward their home port. Others were firing their weapons at sensor contacts that didn't exist, wasting ammunition on ghost targets. "Captain," Park called out with barely contained excitement, "enemy formation is completely broken now. They're scattered across 30 miles of ocean, and at least 6 ships are operating independently. This isn't a fleet anymore, it's just a bunch of scared individual ships." Rodriguez nodded with satisfaction. The transformation was complete. Admiral Kozlov's overwhelming armada had been reduced to a collection of confused, frightened vessels that could barely communicate with each other, let alone coordinate an attack. And they had achieved it all without sinking a single enemy ship or killing a single enemy sailor. The morning sun was now high in the sky, and the ocean that had started the day filled with an organized enemy armada was now scattered with confused and damaged ships. Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Thunder, watching through her binoculars. As another enemy destroyer turned away from the battle area, black smoke trailing from its damaged communication systems. "Captain," Jackson called out from his sonar station, "I'm picking up a lot of chatter on enemy frequencies. Sounds like some of their ship commanders are requesting permission to withdraw." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope. After hours of psychological warfare and precision strikes, The enemy fleet was finally beginning to crack. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. Admiral Kozlov's flagship was still operational, and as long as he remained in the area, there was a chance he could rally his scattered forces. Chief Williams, how are our weapon systems holding up? We're down to about 60% of our missiles, Captain, but all systems are green. The crew has been incredible. We fired 23 precision strikes without a single miss. Rodriguez nodded with pride. Her crew had performed flawlessly under impossible pressure. Every sailor on board had risen to the challenge, executing a plan that most naval experts would have called suicide. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life with Admiral Kozlov's voice. This time, he sounded different, tired, frustrated, and perhaps a little desperate. Captain Rodriguez, I demand to speak with you directly. No more games, no more tricks. I want answers. Rodriguez picked up the microphone, knowing that this conversation would determine how the battle ended. I'm here, Admiral. What can I do for you? Captain, my fleet has been under attack for 3 hours. We've taken damage from multiple directions, faced coordinated strikes, and encountered electronic warfare unlike anything I've seen before. Yet my sensors tell me you have only one ship. Explain this to me. Rodriguez could hear the confusion and anger in Kozlov's voice. She had pushed him to the breaking point, but now she needed to be careful. A desperate enemy could still be dangerous. Admiral, I've been very clear about my mission. These shipping lanes are under international protection, and I have sufficient forces to maintain that protection. Sufficient forces! Kozlov's voice rose. Captain, I need to know exactly what I'm facing here. How many ships are you commanding? This was the moment Rodriguez had been building toward for hours. Everything depended on her next words. She took a deep breath and keyed the microphone. Admiral Kozlov, you're looking at my entire fleet. The silence that followed stretched on for nearly a full minute. Rodriguez could imagine Kozlov on his bridge, staring at his radar screens and trying to process what he had just heard. One ship, one single American destroyer had done all of this. When Kozlov spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. One ship? You're telling me that one ship has been responsible for everything that's happened here today? Admiral Modern. Naval warfare isn't just about the number of ships. It's about technology, tactics, and the quality of your crew. Today, you've experienced what happens when all three come together. Lieutenant Commander Park was monitoring enemy communications, and what he heard made him grin from ear to ear. Captain, their fleet commanders are going nuts. They're demanding explanations from Admiral Kozlov. Some of them are saying they want to withdraw immediately. Rodriguez could see the enemy flagship through her binoculars. There was a lot of activity on deck, with signal lights flashing constantly as Kozlov tried to communicate with his scattered forces. But it was clear that his authority was crumbling along with his formation. Jackson, what's the enemy fleet disposition looking like now? Captain, it's a mess. We've got ships scattered across 40 miles of ocean. At least 8 vessels have suffered significant damage to their communications or propulsion systems. 6 ships have already left the area entirely. The remaining ships are operating in small groups, but they're not coordinating with each other. It was exactly what Rodriguez had hoped to achieve. The enemy fleet's overwhelming numerical advantage had been completely neutralized by confusion, fear, and brilliant tactical planning. The radio crackled again, and this time Kozlov's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Captain Rodriguez, what you've accomplished today is remarkable. I've been commanding naval vessels for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Thank you, Admiral. War is changing. The side that adapts fastest usually wins. Indeed, Kozlov paused for a long moment. Captain, I must ask, how did you do it? How did one ship create such chaos? Rodriguez smiled. She could afford to be generous now. Admiral, it wasn't just one ship. It was one ship with an exceptional crew, advanced technology, and a plan that took advantage of human psychology. We made you see what we wanted you to. See, and your own instincts did the rest? The truth was that Rodriguez had studied everything she could about Admiral Kozlov before the battle. She knew he was a competent commander who relied heavily on coordination and overwhelming force. By taking away his ability to coordinate and making his force seem less overwhelming, she had stripped away his greatest advantages. "Captain, Chief," Williams called out, "I'm seeing major movement in the enemy formation. It looks like they're beginning a general withdrawal." Rodriguez raised her binoculars and watched as enemy ships throughout the area began turning away from the shipping lanes. Some moved individually, while others formed small groups for mutual protection. But none of them were advancing toward their original objective. Admiral Kozlov's voice came over the radio one final time. "Captain Rodriguez, you have won today. My fleet is withdrawing from these waters. But I want you to know that this battle will be studied in naval academies for generations to come. Admiral, I hope it will be studied as an example of how conflicts can be resolved without unnecessary loss of life. Your sailors are brave men and women, and I'm glad we were able to settle this without casualties. As am I, Captain." Kozlov out. Rodriguez set down the microphone and looked around the bridge at her crew. They had done the impossible. A single destroyer had faced down an entire armada and won through intelligence, technology, and sheer audacity. "All hands, this is the captain," Rodriguez announced over the ship's communication system. "The enemy fleet is withdrawing. Mission accomplished. You have all performed with extraordinary skill and courage today. The Thunder and her crew have just made naval history." The cheers that erupted throughout the ship could probably be heard on the enemy vessels still retreating toward the horizon. Rodriguez felt tears in her eyes as she watched her crew celebrate their incredible victory. Commander Park walked over to her with a huge grin on his face. "Captain, I still can't believe we pulled that off. When this story gets out, people are going to think it's fiction." Rodriguez nodded, watching the last of the enemy ships disappear over the horizon. "Park, what we did today proves that in modern warfare, it's not always about who has the most ships or the biggest guns. Sometimes it's about who can think outside the box and adapt fastest to changing circumstances." The Thunder had proven that one well-commanded ship with advanced technology could indeed take on an entire armada. More importantly, they had shown that victory didn't always require destruction. Through careful planning, precision strikes, and psychological warfare, they had achieved their objectives while preserving lives on both sides. As the Thunder resumed its patrol of the shipping lanes, Rodriguez knew that this battle would indeed be remembered for generations. It would be taught as an example of how human ingenuity, technological innovation, and tactical brilliance could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The age of traditional naval warfare was changing, and today the Thunder had written the first chapter of its future.